and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire. No Mike Leno, no Evan Ginsberg, but we have our often co-host, Jonathan Schwartz here, all the way from Canada. And Nikita, where are you from? I always thought you were in New York.
35 miles north of Seattle.
Oh, Seattle.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So we got another coast involved, the far northern coast. And these days, the difference between San Francisco and Seattle is almost none, except for we have the Golden Gate Bridge and you have the Sky Needle. But otherwise, we have the same darn weather that you have. It's been nothing but rain for like 3 months here in the Bay Area. And we just got hit with one of those atmospheric rivers. I don't know if you know, when I was a kid, there was no such thing as an atmospheric river. You they used to say rain like cats and dogs, and
Yeah.
I just stepped in a poodle.
Yeah.
But it's been raining nonstop here, and if we have any interruption, it might be because of the weather out here. But it looks like how are you doing in Canada, Jonathan, over by Toronto?
I was going to say, I see your rain and I raise you some pretty hefty snowflakes coming down right now.
Yeah, no snow here. How about up in Seattle?
No, we're just about out of our snow season. We're good.
We've had more snow here than in the recorded history of Tahoe, the ski resort. And they go back even to Native American times. And they say they've never seen, no one has ever recorded this much snow being in Tahoe. So it's great for skiers. And if I hadn't broken my hip 7 years ago this week, I would probably join them. But I fell down my steps in rain similar to this because my foot hydroplaned at the top step. And I fell down my stairs. And let's just put it this way. My years of Swanton bombing and 460s are out of the, are no longer going to be part of my routine, my daily routine.
I was going to say, if we spot you a tarantula in the desert, you're in superstar Billy Graham territory.
Yeah, thank you. No, all I can say is that I didn't take steroids to weaken my bones. I drank a lot of milk, and probably if I hadn't, that would have been even worse. But anyway, it's great to have you guys on the show, especially Nikita. It's been a number of months since we had you, so so we've got a number of interesting topics. We'll talk about your hat in a few minutes because I'm fascinated about the Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view event that was featured on Wrestling with Regrets. Well, we'll talk about that later. One of the big stories that's out this week, and I got to get both of your takes on this, is Vince McMahon trying to convince gambling and state legislatures to accept betting on wrestling as a thing. Leave it up to either one of you. Who wants to say something first?
I'll defer to our guest first.
Please, Nikita, tell us. What do you have to say about that?
If anybody can do it, he can. If anybody can make an idiot understand, Vince McMahon can do it. And he'll make that happen. Trust me. How stupid can somebody be to even entertain that idea? But he will get it through. Trust me.
So now,
aren't there sports books that already?
No, there's no place. Even in England, they won't let you bet on wrestling matches, and that's usually the most lenient possible gambling culture that you can find. You can find a prop bet on anything.
Yeah,
but
no, because I've seen like the last several WrestleManias, particularly that they'll basically run odds. So I presume that comes from somewhere. Somebody's handicapping it. Yeah,
it's because for some people that have fantasy wrestling leagues, they use those numbers to help them determine who gets over in a fantasy wrestling thing. But you can't. I don't think there's anywhere in the United States or even anywhere that allow. I mean, can we bet next on like Romeo and Juliet? What the odds are that which Montagues and which Capulets are gonna survive the exchange? Can we?
I thought this time he'd make it.
Yeah, exactly. He was due.
And when Vince does this, Pete Rose goes into the Baseball Hall of Fame. That's it.
Why not? I mean, if you can allow gambling on something that is predetermined, and you've heard like what the story is that how they want to do it is they want like for WrestleMania the results to be like put in, an envelope that's sealed and put in a mayonnaise jar under Funk and Wagnall's porch. Do you remember that routine by Johnny Carson? And when he would do Kreskin, the Magnificent, he'd say, "And this envelope is going to be in a mayonnaise jar, empty mayonnaise jar sealed under Funk and Wagnall's porch." So nobody knows the answer. I mean, really, do you really think that and then would you ever bet on a wrestling? I mean, you would think you'd know. We've been, you and I and everybody I know can usually call any wrestling match well before the guys even step into the ring. So
Right.
What do you guys think?
You could, based upon, like I used to say, true fiction. I put that in my book. I refer to that as like, okay, you suspend your belief of reality. So now let's try to figure out, who do you think would win, Superstar, Billy Graham, or Ivan Putski? So where are you going to put your money? And it's like, you could try to figure out an outcome and put money on that, but I don't know how state athletic commissions would look at that. I mean, there's regulations and everything.
What about casinos? Those are even more important than a state athletic commission.
It's money, so they don't give a shit how it's coming in. They'll take it, man.
And what do you think it'll get over?
With Pop tonight, they'll put $1 on that one. They don't care.
I'm actually going to play devil's advocate here. I think it actually could be a good thing. I think, for people like us who've been watching and for guys like yourself who've actually been part of the scene forever, at some point, the biggest knock against WWE primarily, and I'll say AEW and really any promotion of any kind of permanence, is that at some point the results become predictable. You know that Roman Reigns is going to retain unless there's a darn good reason, unless he doesn't. In order to make betting remotely attractive, you have to introduce an element of unpredictability. That's why people spend so much money on betting on the Super Bowl, for example, because you don't know who's going to win. Although there's an argument that that's a work too. So if you're, and speaking as somebody who's not a Tom Brady fan, I'm almost inclined to buy that logic. But I will say that if it makes outcomes less predictable, if it introduces a little bit more randomness to storytelling as these things go forward, why not? I think the bigger issue when it comes to betting is, since so much of it has shifted online, at least up here it has, how do you make sure that the people who are going to make those bets are going to do so at least somewhat responsibly? What safeguards are you going to put in place, for example, so that kids who are a larger part of the wrestling audience are not going to be encouraged to start down that road?
Why not?
What do you say, Nikita?
Let them do it. It's just like the old saying about the numbers. Growing up on the East Coast, there was always the daily number. And how the mafia would do it, it would be based upon the first 3 horse races of the day. Whatever the number of the horses were, that's how you would figure out what the number of the day was. Of course, that was illegal. Nobody wanted it because the friggin' state didn't get their cut. That's why. Because then all of a sudden they come up with the Maryland State Lottery, and that's all of a sudden that's legal. It's like, well, what the hell is the difference? Only that you bastards didn't get your cut. Now it's fine. The story about, they're going to lose their paycheck. The kids are going to go hungry. Nobody cares. And I used to go for my mother to buy her lottery tickets. And let me tell you something. People were in those lines, and they would dole out 50, hundreds, unbelievable amounts of money. And nobody said, hey, look, there's a $20 minimum so your family doesn't go to the poorhouse. They didn't give a shit because they were collecting it.
Now, have you guys ever personally bet on any sporting events?
Nah, I never got involved in that.
Not really.
Yeah, no, I don't bet on sports either, as much as a fan as I am of stuff, because that's something I want to enjoy. I want to watch it for the enjoyment of it. Do you think that if people had money on wrestlers, that they'd either enjoy it more or they'd enjoy it less because suddenly, Salvatore Bellomo doesn't go 3 minutes against Big John Studd and you lose your house over it? what?
It's intense at that point. Yes, you have upped the bar without a doubt because somebody's ass is on the line. So yeah, that would make it more interesting.
And don't you think there'd be some A, repercussions against wrestlers, and B, the temptation to like fans going crazy over the fact that their favorite didn't win?
Well, now in the days when it was real, they had that. And let me tell you something. Do either of you know who Dick Worley is?
The referee. He worked for WWF and for the AWA as well.
And Dick Worley told me a story. He said, I used to carry a gun. He said, because we would get as much heat as the heels when a title would change hands or we missed a tag. He said, people would come after us over it. And you know the story, but it's still like, when it was believable, yeah, the referee would take the heat. Same thing with umpires and referees in football. In fact, I forget who the ball player was for the Yankees now. Maybe it'll come to me later. But he said, man, if you struck out or if you blew a play, people would send you death threats in New York City. He said, I hated playing in New York because it was so intense. And it's like, I can see where that would happen.
And that's when people don't have money on wrestling.
They just want to win because they say we won. And it's like, I didn't see you playing, jerk, but it's always we won. But yeah, when you got money on the line, oh, daddy, it's a different game. Different ball game, no pun intended.
And I don't think there's ever been an instance where people have bet on a scripted event other than maybe like Who Shot JR, when people were doing office polls on who, I don't know if that made it up to Canada, that Who Shot JR.
Oh, we're familiar.
Yes, okay. I didn't
we
know.
Had Dallas.
Dallas.
We know Patrick Duffy was a dream. We got it.
Yes, and I still haven't gotten over that. And sometimes I think that's what they may want to do with Roman Reigns' title shot. They may just, have one day Patrick Duffy show up in the shower and say, I dream that, he would say, it was just all a dream, honey. The title reign of Roman Reigns right now. It was just a dream. Anyway,
see that? There's an angle.
You have Vince waking up next to Linda.
There you go.
That alone makes it fiction.
There you go. Or next to, actually, it'd be better if he woke up next to Brock Lesnar. That'd be greater humor, I think. Anyway, the next thing is that Vince McMahon and Saudi Arabia and the supposedly $9 billion deal. It looks like Saudi Arabia is the only serious contender right now to buy the WWE. What do you guys think? Do you think it's going to happen?
If they got the money, it will happen.
I think that runs counter to your first story. I think depending on.
I think they're related. I think they're related, but I don't think it's counter because he wants to. I think Vince wants to get that gambling thing in place, so that would make it even more attractive to the Saudi Arabians to make this a profit-making enterprise.
Oh, I think it actually makes it less attractive from a cultural standpoint. There's a prohibition against gambling,
which is true too. But the Saudis, and I will say this, have absolutely no moral compass. So they say things like that gambling is against their religion, but they would just as soon back a casino if they knew that the people in Saudi Arabia didn't give a crap about it. They just want to get Westerners money. So, they don't really care how they get Westerners money. They just want it. So I think the Saudi Arabians would accept the WWE and this gambling thing. Plus, they would say, look, it's not the WWE that's doing this. It's other casinos and gambling facilities. That's the WWE technically doesn't have control over that. But it does mean that more people will watch, and it means that it makes it a more attractive investment because it's more popular because of the gambling element. Because let's face it, as much as, and I'm not a fan of sports gambling. In fact, if I can bore you guys with a story, my father was fraternity brothers with a guy named Jack Molinas. And Jack Molinas, first of all, was the only all-star ever selected from Columbia University in New York City. he was a fraternity brother of my dad's, and Jack Molinas got caught in the NBA in his first year as an All-Star as part of a point shaving scheme that was going on, and he got banned from the NBA. He's the only NBA player to ever be accused and removed from NBA competition because of point shaving. So, and I mean, from the sound of it, they said that they would, at the fraternity house, they would, the fraternity brothers would pick a raindrop on a windowsill that was going down the glass, and they'd race raindrops between and pick which one would hit the bottom of the window first. They would bet on like flies landing and where they would land on what thing, because they would gamble on literally anything. And the temptation the gambling brings to bring dishonesty and point shaving and all that stuff, it's huge. I think that it's too much of an influence. You brought up Pete Rose as a good example of that. I mean, I'm all for the lifetime banishment of Pete Rose, because I believe not only did he bet on his own team, but I bet you he bet against his own team and helped throw some games so that he'd make money, because when gamblers will do that. That's what gambling's all about. You'll do anything for a short bet. If you know that you can bet on something that is 100% odds in your favor because you can do something about it, and you're an inveterate gambler, you're going to do it.
No different than the stock market. When you have somebody on the inside giving you the information and tips, like poor Martha Stewart, she was the fall guy, so to speak. And it's like, really? The people that are in the Senate are immune from such action, and they do it. They get their information. But poor Martha Stewart, she took one for the team, and it's like, boy, that was shit, I'll tell you. So, yeah, I don't believe Pete Rose bet against his team. I would not.
I do. I think that's why he won't reveal. That's why he won't, he doesn't protest his suspension.
He's been all over the place for decades.
But he won't go to court on it. He won't go to court on it because
he'd lose.
Yeah,
what?
Yeah.
And whatever advice he had, and at one point, I think that from Major League Baseball's perspective, initially the idea was never that it was going to be a lifetime ban. The idea was that there was a process in place to actually rehabilitate him and actually get him into the Hall of Fame. But Bart Giamatti died before it could happen. And then you had Bud Selig, who wasn't necessarily the greatest manager in the history of baseball, and the world has moved on.
The reason he wouldn't go to court is because they have the document. It's like you can have a whole team of lawyers, you can spend millions, but the bottom line is, if Major League Baseball rules say you are not to bet, no matter who or how, that's it. You're not going to beat that. So it's no sense. Save your money. A lawyer would tell him, we're not even going to take this to court. You're going to lose. The particulars do not matter. It's the final action, and you did it. So no matter who you bet on, they've got you, and that's it. So going to court isn't going to help. You just have to hope that Major League Baseball at some point becomes benevolent and says, okay, Pete Rose, you're in. It's up to them.
I think their steadfastness is because they know deep down that he threw games for his own team based on things that he could control. And that's the like dirty secret that Major League Baseball doesn't want to get out, which would get out if they let him back in. Because I know that Pete Rose would eventually cough that up. He's eventually, it's the one thing he's never said that he hasn't done, because he won't answer questions on it. So, he says, I'm not allowed to talk about it because of the agreement. So I think that baseball knows and can prove that he did bet against his own team. And that
could be too, Russ, because it's like when you sign those things, especially, I mean, you and I, nobody would know what the hell we're talking about to somebody. They don't pay attention to what we do, but him, every syllable, there's 8 different stations and 55 newspapers. It's like, no, he's stuck. He definitely has to be careful what he says. So he's got to live by that.
Yeah. And so going back to this Vince in Saudi Arabia, do you think that the WWE, and Jonathan, same with you, think the WWE is going to wind up selling out to Saudi Arabia?
Sure. Why not? He's going to take the money. He's looking to get out. Look, I've told people this for years. In his mind, in 1984, started in 1983, Vince McMahon created this wrestling entertainment. And when he's ready to go, he's taking it with him. And that's what you've been seeing. He's been chopping at the tree, each swing of the axe, and the tree's ready to fall. So now it's like he's going to take as much as he can, and he's done with it because it's not worth saving anyway.
I got to admit, I'm not entirely sure. I think that the play behind all of this is less about selling it to the highest bidder and more about him ultimately trying to take it private again. I think that one of the and I actually wrote a fair bit about this a little while ago. I think that while it made him a whole ton of money, becoming a publicly traded company, even if he's the vast majority shareholder, introduced a level of public scrutiny to that company that he regrets every single day of his life. It opened the box to all kinds of exposure to regulators, to all kinds of public scrutiny. You can FOI anything on, you can launch a Freedom of Information request on pretty much anything going on. And we don't know the half of the kind of, and I'll throw the words out there, chicanery and skullduggery that have gone on to make WWE what it is today.
It's a good point.
And we're seeing, chickens come to roost. There was the Rita Chatterton case, which was where it was launched back in the 1980s, and he just paid her off. Why are you going to pay off a case that's almost 50 years old and that went away? There's the mysterious briefcase that was allegedly circulated that Mushnick had raised around Jimmy Snuka's case, where he walks in.
I hadn't heard about the briefcase. Explain what's going on with that.
So, if you're familiar with Jimmy Snuka, there were allegations going back to the early 80s where he allegedly basically beat his then girlfriend to death.
May 30th, 1983, correct.
Yeah. And police came, brought him in for questioning. I don't know if he was ever actually arrested at the time. I can't remember that fact.
Yes, he was.
But supposedly what happened is Vince McMahon catches wind of this, walks into the police station with a briefcase, which some have claimed was full of money. I don't know whether this is the case or not, but that's just kind of the narrative.
Or was it money in the bank? It was a money in the bank briefcase.
There were no title shots coming out of that one, buddy. And walks out, and Snuka's basically a free man. No charges were filed until decades and decades later, and it took an awful lot of investigative reporting to get police to pay attention to it again.
They were not criminal charges. It was civil. But when 30 years later, before the statute of limitations ran out, that was a civil case. And it's like, I used to be a law enforcement for 27 years. You've got no witnesses. The only person that's alive is the suspect. You've got no crime scene. That Howard Johnson has disappeared. Nobody else to corroborate anything. You've got no case. Yeah, the judge ruled that he was incompetent because of head injuries, but it didn't matter. At that point, it was a waste of time because you can't prove anything. You'd be lucky to prove that he was there. Now, was there a suitcase full of money? That wasn't up to the police to charge him. It would have been up to the state's attorney for that jurisdiction, which was in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Did Vince pay them off? I don't know. I mean, of course, nobody's going to ever give you the truth on it. But if she refused to press charges, then that would have been the end of it right there.
She was dead.
What's that?
She was dead.
So yeah,
well, I mean,
but her family.
She was dead at this. No, okay. Well, she was dead at the scene. If she didn't, being a victim, wasn't going to press charges, or the family. I know the family pursued it from day one, True. They wanted justice for their family member, daughter, whatever. And it's like, yeah, I'm not in favor of it. I mean, it's terrible, but you didn't ever prove that it happened. I mean, you're getting conflicting stories, but you still don't have that key thing, evidence. And I had this discussion with someone the other day. It's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, in a civil case, it's a coin toss. Anything,
50 plus 1.
0.0001%, sure.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, give her money, no problem. But again, what the hell did he have at the end of the line? So it's like, why are you doing this 30 years later? It's ridiculous. It should have been done then when it happened, when it was fresh and something could have been done forensic wise. They didn't have the technology that has come through the years, obviously in 1983, but it could have been more done. But it's like now, 30 years later, if somebody handed me that case, I'd be like, what are you, crazy? What am I going to do with this? There's nothing here.
Jonathan, would you have taken the case?
Defense?
No, to try to as a plaintiff.
No, detective, somebody investigating it. As a plaintiff, you take a shot. You may win it. Nothing to lose.
And to be, well, I mean, you're as much of a lawyer as I am. The idea is that regardless
I'm not. But it's nice that you think I am. That I've apparently pulled the wool over your eyes pretty good.
You've had the same training that I have. I'll put it that way. Jurisdictions notwithstanding. The idea is that regardless of which side you're on, one, you're trying to secure the best result for your client, but more importantly, you're trying to hold the system accountable either way. And if it was a case that things were not handled properly, and the argument is that the WWF at the time inserted itself into the process in some way that kind of scuttled what could have been a successful prosecution. I don't know whether they did or not, but that's been the argument. If there's anything that could have come out of that, that's problematic. By the same token, if I'm representing Jimmy Snuka, depending on what I know, I can't necessarily say he didn't do it if there's evidence that says he very definitely did. But then the argument becomes, how do you hold the system accountable? How do you make sure that the evidence that's being gathered is being gathered properly, and that the police in this case have done what they're supposed to do?
The old story, though, I don't have to prove I didn't do it. You have to prove I did it. So good luck. Mm-hmm. I ain't going to say a word, and we'll see you in court. Now,
that's why the first thing you do if you're ever questioned by the police is you get a lawyer.
I would never say that just because it was a wrestler that the police really, it's Jimmy Snuka. Because look what happened to Patera and Saito. I mean, that was a battle and a half where they just about got shot. So not everybody's a wrestling fan. And I don't think that it was just a case of money that changed. I understood that they made a large donation to some type of charity. The WWF did, and Snuka agreed to perform. But it's like, if it was a solid case for a homicide, there's nothing anybody could have done to change that. A state's attorney, district attorney, whatever you want to call him for the jurisdiction, would have said, he could take a hike. This guy's charged. We'll see you in court.
Yeah, well, they made a Dark Side of the Ring on it. It's still,
bullshit stories, of course. Yeah.
I've liked the Dark Side of the Ring stuff, but, it does get hard to do like a marathon of those, because after that you want to just step in front of a moving van or something like that. So it makes you feel so bad about like the reality of this business. It's
I'll just change the channel to 90 Day Fiancé.
Ah, great. I've been watching
different kind of scripted entertainment.
I've been watching She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. I've been watched that over the weekend, so that's been my legal guilty pleasure for everyone. And speaking of guilty pleasures, one of the things I do like to do is I like to watch Wrestling with Regret, which is WREGRET. It's a clever show. And actually, I did see one of the guys I used to manage in Lust of the Legend was on his show. But then I was watching the Wrestling with Regret. And one thing that Jonathan, I didn't tell you about Nikita is that he is the former manager of Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik. And as far as I know, we haven't had too many wrestlers or managers on this show that have done an actual pay-per-view. And so I was watching Wrestling with Regrets that had the Heroes of Wrestling on. He was doing kind of a trash up review of Heroes of Wrestling. And lo and behold, there is my pal, Nikita Breznikov, raising the hand of, I think, the Iron Sheik, and he had something snarky to say about, like, he couldn't hear you or something like that, and I was like, that's Nikita. So I said, I got to get him on the show and find out about his experience on Heroes of Wrestling. So first of all, tell me about Heroes of Wrestling. How did you get contacted for it, and then what was your involvement like, and what was your thought about being on that pay-per-view?
The way I got into it, it was because I was Nikolai's roommate. That's what Meltzer said, the bastard. Because Evan Ginsberg and I went at him back a couple of months after that pay-per-view. Of course not. Rick O'Brien was the promoter. He booked everything. So it's like, want to have you and Nikolai and the Sheik? It's like, yeah, that'd be great. Man, that's exciting to be on the pay-per-view. But
who is this promoter? Can you tell me a little bit more background about the promoter?
Rick O'Brien was doing the booking. The guy that was in charge, Foss Stone Production, Fossstone. Bill Stone was a big lawyer in D.C. I flew back because I was going to Maryland after the pay-per-view, and he was on the same plane. His idea was to do at least bi-monthly, hopefully monthly, and then maybe progress from there, and to have events. When you saw it, Russ, did you see the interview with Lou Albano, or Lou? They made him the
yes, the commissioner. So commissioner. Yes,
but the things he was saying was true. Appearances, they're going to be doing this, they're going to be doing that. Was the intent. The reason it didn't happen was because, number one, the one-man gang and Abdul, their match was so bloody, it was like they did not want that. But it looked great. I mean, they did a hell of a job. And then what Jake the Snake did with the Snake, that was bad. That was like, oh my God, no. And it was like, yeah, because he.
Why don't you describe both things to Jonathan? Because Jonathan,
I'm familiar with this. This is the infamous. So, ironically, the A&E autobiography on Jake Roberts just aired earlier this week up here. And this is the pay-per-view where Jake Roberts, by this point, out of WWE, out of WCW, very much down on his luck, very much in the throes of a pretty awful addiction. And he shows up to the pay-per-view bombed out of his mind, basically, and winds up being completely inappropriate live on camera, starts manipulating the Snake that he's handling as though it's, as though he's stroking it off, basically.
That was it. Yep. I had the Snake earlier that night, too. It was like, yeah, you want to say, yeah, whatever. I know he's not going to kill me, so that's fine. I don't like him. I don't dislike him. But, yeah, the Snake was cool. So, yeah, that did it. And then before the main event, I'm not going to mention who, somebody decided they wanted more money. And, I mean, the music's playing. They're ready to go out. And it's like, I'm not doing the job because I'm getting ready to go to WWE next week, and I can't lose on TV. And it's like, so by the time that all hit, and then the piracy that took effect with the cable, this guy Stone said, that's it, I'm done. This ain't going to work. It's just a losing proposition altogether. The idea, you could not expect those guys to compete like they did in their younger years. Anybody that expected that is an idiot. It was to give you because WWE was, I enjoyed what they were doing with Vince and Stone Cold. It was a comedy routine. It was great. You tuned in every week to see what the hell Stone Cold was going to do to him next. Had nothing to do with wrestling, but it was cool to watch. So it was like, all right, let's give a different selection on the menu. And that's what Heroes of Wrestling was. You brought a lot of legends together. Were some past their prime? Sure. but it would be like booing somebody at an old timers game. It's like you don't have enough respect to just say, hey, these guys did through the years, they sacrificed their bodies and got the girls too. Only Sherry was the only female there and she was managing. God rest her soul, she's beautiful. But it's like
Sherry Martel.
Why it was trashed as badly? It's like the shit I've seen. You think that's the worst of all time? I'll take that tag. That's great to wave that flag and own. I don't care, but it's stupid to say it because it's just not true.
Well, he didn't say it was the worst of all time, and it isn't. He's shown some stuff that's even worse than that. But still, he didn't exactly give it any blow any kisses your way, or anybody's way that was on the pay-per-view.
Well, if he said he couldn't hear me, it may be true, because I'll tell you what, you couldn't hear each other talk in the ring. The crowd was into it. It was at Casino Magic in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, was a casino, which is gone. It's been wiped off the map by another hurricane. They had rebuilt once, and then, that's just, God help you if you live in that area, because you're just prone to the hurricanes and that kind of weather. So it was like the crowd was into it. They loved it. You could watch the crowd reaction because, fans are unforgiving. If it's bullshit, they're going to, in New York at least, they would call bullshit as a chant. So it's like they loved it. They had an enjoyable time. People were excited. And I think everything was delivered as promised. But, for those that sit there, like you're talking about, would they bet, even though the outcome? But people that sit there and actually think, well, what was the work rate for that? It's like, stop it. There's not going to be a work rate when somebody's in their 40s and they're 50. Maybe a couple were even in their 50s. But you saw Abdul and One Man Gang, and they did not hold back. The Red Cross wish they had been on site because they would have got a good blood donation out of that.
Yeah, but you don't want Abdullah's blood going to anybody.
Yeah,
unless they don't mind getting Hep C as an added present to that. But so what your match? You and the Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik. Who did they face?
The Bushwhackers.
The Bushwhackers. So what was that match like?
I'll tell you a funny story. Sheik got there.
That's why you're here, by the way. Is for the funny story, not for your looks. We didn't book you for your looks.
Go figure. Sheik got on the wrong plane. Okay, so instead of going south, he was going north. He got things turned around, and he got there on time. Just about. It was almost Nikolai and myself against the Bushwhackers. So here comes Sheik, I'm here, I'm ready. It's like, okay, good, Sheik is here. So Rick O'Brien's going over the finish, and he's like, well, Sheik, since you're here last, you're going to take the fall. And he's like, no, they could pin my manager. And it's like, Sheik, that's stupid. Why in the hell would they pin the manager? It doesn't make any sense. And Nikolai's laughing his ass off. He says, see, Sheik, you'll come last, so now you take it. You have to take the fall. And it's like, okay, he died 1,000 deaths, but it went over well. Working with the Bushwhackers, I love them. They're great guys. And they, even though they were turned into cartoons as the Bushwhackers, as the New Zealand sheep herders, man, you talk about, they say ECW was brutal. Shit, that was kindergarten compared to those guys in Puerto Rico. My God, that was incredible. I don't know how you'd survive those matches.
They were incredibly bloodthirsty heels.
Yes, and that was
and there's stuff in
matches.
In Memphis too, yeah. And the whole series across the UWF and into the NWA with the Fantastics as well. I mean,
I remember seeing a barbed wire cage match with the Fantastics, which was pretty damn bloody.
I got to tell you, that's one case where I thought Vince completely missed the boat. I know he made a lot of money, and I know that they wound up extending their careers, and they probably made more money off of the Bushwhacker gimmick than they ever did as the sheep herders, which I know is the
yes
be all and end all. But man, were they great heels.
And George Steele would tell you the same thing. He said, they killed my character, but I made 18 times more money as that goofy character than I ever did as George the Animal Steele, where people would run from me. And I was one, when I was a fan, I'd run over the next person to get away from that crazy bastard when he come in our direction. Because we believed. I
Yeah.
mean, you saw him tear the building up, and it was like, wow.
So, Nikita, tell me how you got started managing Nikolai Volkov. How did that all occur from the beginning?
Actually, now see, I was a tape collector back to the VHS days. So I saw what would be a staple in my life, the cardboard advertisement. I was working for the police department, and I was on a day shift, and it was saying it was a local boys club, Nikolai Volkov, going to be in the main event. I'm thinking, ooh, maybe I'll come over here. Maybe I can talk to Nikolai and see if he could get me a line on some matches. Because at that time, I really was way behind on the matches, collection-wise. So I was there. He shows up. He comes walking in. He says, "Hello, Sergeant." I say, "Hey, Nikolai, how are you?" So he goes, changes, and comes out to start selling his gimmicks. So I go over. I talk to him, and he says, "No, I don't have nothing, but I will pay you." He said, "I would like to have match." I said, "Nikolai, you would pay me nothing. So all those years, I'll make you all the matches in the world." So then we became friends. And then I kept pestering him until he said, "Okay, you can become the manager." I'm like, I don't want to be the manager, but okay, I'll do that. And then, from there, I got to work with Bruno Sammartino as a referee. Still, it was Bruno's match. All the greats, Snuka, Bundy, because I was with Nikolai. So he was always main event when we would go. People Dominic DiNucci, God rest his soul, another great one. So I got to learn, and I thought I knew everything going in that door. And it was like, I didn't know shit. I didn't even know how to tie the shoes yet. But they were good to me. Instead of letting me go out there and break my neck, they took care of me. Probably loyalty to Nikolai as well. Because, well, that's one business, though. You're a family. You have to be. But if you start to act cocky or stupid, well, then you're going to be finding out soon how you go to the hospital because somebody's going to put you there.
So when did you get introduced to the Iron Sheik? When was that, made?
About a year and a half later is when the Sheik came into the picture. Now, there was a great promoter out of New Jersey named Dennis Carluzzo, a good friend of mine. God rest his soul. He was another great guy. And he had an open invitation to Monday Night Raw. He was very close with Jim Cornette. And they would have him on Monday Night Raw. Dennis basically was what was running what they do now in Florida and Tennessee and different places. He was the school. He was the training route. So he had a lot of talent, like Batista. I knew Dave Batista long before anybody heard his name, and lots of other ones. Bobcat, Dawn Marie. I knew all these people in their younger days. But Dennis was the training round. So Dennis didn't like Nikolai. Everybody just doesn't like somebody at some point in their life. You can be the nicest guy in the world, like a Nikolai, but somebody's always not going to like you. It just happens.
Jonathan has no enemies.
Somebody doesn't like you, Jonathan. Guarantee it. So Dennis approaches me. He says, "Listen, I don't want Nikolai, but I want you. I want you to manage Sheik." And I'm like, "Dennis, I can't do that. Jeez, Nikolai he got me in the damn door. Not that I ever expected to open a door, but there's no way I'm going to turn my back on him, So I told Nikolai, he's like, "You stupid son of a bitch, you should have done it." I said, "No, Nikolai, I'm not going to do that to you. I can't." So we missed out on some bookings there, but we got together a lot through the years, the three of us, and it was great. Just loved the Sheik. I have good stories about Sheik, but I hate when people make a fool of him because there has never been a more dedicated athlete except Bob Backlund to training. Sheik did a lot of bad shit. There ain't no two ways about it. I'm not going to say he was altar boy, but when it came to training, he's first guy in line, and there he goes doing his thing. And that routine with the clubs, that's legitimate. Those things were heavy. Even Nikolai couldn't do it. They were about 75 pounds each, but Sheik would pick them up. And I'm like, my God, I watch guys tear their shoulders out trying to do that over the years. He could do it, though. He trained from a young man. I mean, his wrist strength, just incredible to be able to do that. And, of course, You got to have the shoulders for it too. Well, Sheik never looked like a bodybuilder. But this thing that The Rock is doing with the TV show, the guy that looks like the Sheik, it's like he never looked like that. He was never caught up with a definition like that. That looks more like Snuka did, in his day. Sheik didn't look like that. In fact, Sheik had trouble. He did train United States teams in 1972 and 76, and that's how he met Vern Gagne. He had trouble gaining weight, so he had to really work at that. So, 240, that was pushing it, but he could still beat the hell out of anybody. I mean, when they said he was offered the money to break Hogan's leg, they know he could do it.
And he was known, at one point, he was known as King of the Suplexes.
Yes, without a doubt. He had very, very many variations of it. He could suplex it. Well, they call it the salto, and then, the double chicken wing suplex, all of them. He could do everything, anything. And you could not blow him up. You give him an hour and he would go. In fact, in Madison Square Garden, when he wrestled Backlund, he won the Battle Royal, which went almost a half hour. And it was June the 4th of 79. And they were a little bit afraid because of all the political thing that was going on with Iran. They didn't want to advertise him against Backlund because they were afraid of a riot. So they said, we'll do this. We got to have a match with Backlund and Sheik. He'll win the Battle Royal, which was the very first Battle Royal in the history of the Garden, and then he can wrestle Backlund. And that match went a half hour. But boy, anybody would tell you, working with Sheik, he could waffle you with the chair. He nailed Backlund a couple of good times. You watch the chair bend. It's like, holy shit. And Backlund would take it, too. He wanted you to dish it out. Like when he got the whipping from the Sarge, if you read Backlund's book, he said, I want you to lay it in there. He said, and I'll be sweated because I'm going to be doing that step-up test for about 40 minutes before. So every time you hit me, it's going to really come through. And he said, lay him in, Sarge. And Slaughter was like, I didn't want to do it. But I had to do it, and it was like, man, he was cut. I mean, it was brutal, but it was great. We loved it. He packed
Backlund's an underrated tough guy.
Oh, shit. The toughest there ever was, too, without a doubt.
Like incredibly. In his book, too, there's a scene where he talks about doing a title-for-title match with Ric Flair. And there was a question whether Flair was going to try and double-cross him. And Flair would be the first to acknowledge that he's not a real fighter. He'll get his way out of a hostile arena, but, I mean, half the time he'd drop the title in a hostile arena just to get out alive. And at some point, Backlund and Flair meet up backstage to kind of go over what's going to happen. And, Flair's basically begging off like he would in the ring as a heel, just making sure that there's not going to be any problems. Backlund could take anyone at the time.
His words were, please, Bob, don't hurt me.
Yeah.
I don't know what those guys that are running the companies are up to. You straight with me, I'll be straight with you. We'll go have a hell of a match, but don't pull no bullshit because I can.
Another question that I always had about Nikolai Volkov.
Let me tell you this story.
I didn't mean to.
Let me tell you this one. Johnny Valiant, God rest his soul, another good friend. He said he was up, Vince, before he took over the company, he owned at the New Haven, he owned the Coliseum up there. So Johnny said this was after Vince owned the company, he was in charge. So Johnny got there early and he said, I put my bag down. He said, I hear this guy howling and screaming. He's like, what the hell's going on? So he goes and Vince is standing in the doorway, big smile. He's watching, right? And so Johnny's like, Vince, what's going on? He's like, see that guy there? Big tough biker. He come here. He said, I don't want to get some of these chunk wrestlers. They think they're tough guys. I'm going to see who your toughest one is. So he's like, hey, Bob, come here. This guy wants to test you. Bob got him in a front face lock, and that was it. The guy couldn't get loose. He was screaming for his mommy. And it's like, there you go. You don't want to crawl. And I saw it so many times over the years when stupid people would come out of the crowd and take a swing, and it's like, it was disastrous.
Oh yeah, no. I one time when the Pacific Pro Wrestling had their only show in Northern California, anywhere in the United States. That was Dwayne Johnson's very first appearance in San Jose in 1985, or 84, I believe. He came out and they did Polynesian Pro Wrestling did their only show in San Jose, and two drunk idiots came into the ring, and there were these two cowboy, I forget the two guys that were the cowboy, like, good guys, and the Japanese were the heels, and the two cowboy good guys just stood in the corner, and the Japanese heels absolutely beat the tar out of the two drunk guys that came into the ring. And the security just said, we're not doing anything about it, and the other guys didn't, and we just sat there and we were all treated to these two guys. And then once they were completely beaten up, and it wasn't, throwing across the ring or body slamming, it was just that and a bunch of kicks. And then they just, tossed him out of the ring, and then security escorted them out. And that was an early sign to me of, like, don't get in the ring at all against someone. If you don't know what the hell you're doing, you should. These guys are way tougher than anyone gives them credit for. And most of them had, either done football, martial arts, been in the military. I meet very few wrestlers, even today, that don't have some kind of legit fighting background, usually MMA, before they get into the wrestling ring and try to apply their trade. There are very few of the, crusher types that are like, guys who, beer delivery people or most of them are bodyguards at a club or something like that, or have some kind of job, or ex-police, they have some kind of, like, combat training before they ever get into the ring. So I have a question about Nikolai, which is that, what was his feeling when he became World Tag Team Champion? Because as far as I know, that's the only really major title he ever had in the WWF, right? And how did he feel about that? And how did he feel about his title run overall?
They loved it. He hated carrying that belt around. He said it was a pain in the ass. But they're together. Now, see, when people talk about Hulk Hogan in 1984, I'm quick to point out, don't forget the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. They were hot. And this feud between Slaughter and the Sheik, and the Slaughter and Nikolai and Piper, you got to add all of that in there. But Nikolai, he worked with the Sheik great. I mean, they were very close. They were like they were married. They could fight, argue, never physical, but then they love each other without a doubt. I mean, they were inseparable. And they would take care of each other, very much so, because the Sheik's medals got stolen one time. I forget the city. I wasn't with them. But the other room got broken into. And Sheik started blaming Nikolai. He said, Nikolai, you were hollering in the lobby for the room number, and the stupid bastards know where we stay. And it's like, and Nikolai said, but I told him, but Sheik, you worry about your goofy medal. They stole my hot plate. Yeah. They wanted to kill him then. Well, Nikolai used to do that. He'd cook in the room. He'd bring and buy steak, like especially Japan, they said, geez, he would not go to restaurants. But he came from the real communism. He was Croatian. The Russians took the family farm, and he knew what it was like to want. So he was, people call him cheap. You call me cheap too, because they ain't giving it away. When you earn it, you better hold on to it, man, because it slides away quick.
So actually, since you brought up him coming from communism, one of the stories that I heard through Freddie Blassie was actually when they wanted to repackage him away from being Mongolian to being a Russian heel. He was not thrilled with the idea. He hated Soviet Russia.
And that was Freddie's first protege in 1974, and he convinced him, because Nikolai said, I don't want to do that shit. And Freddie said, but Nikolai, you can show them how mean they are and what bastards they are, and you make a lot of money. And I think, oh, you're right, Freddie. I make the money. So that's good.
So if I can ask a follow-up.
And there's another love affair. They loved each other, Freddie Blassie and Nikolai, without a doubt.
If I can ask, a few years down the road, so Nikolai's had his run with the Sheik. He's had his run with Boris Zukov and Slick as the Bolsheviks. Goes away for a little while, And then they bring him back in a more kind of subservient role to Ted DiBiase when he was just kind of getting his stable off the ground. And I'll admit, I'm just a fan. So I kind of come at this like, I always wonder how much of it is real and how much of it is kind of what they think behind the scenes. And I wondered, for somebody who'd had the kind of career that he did, is it the kind of thing that you just, well, it's a paycheck and you go about and do your job? Or what were his feelings about that part of his career?
He hated the 2 Cents character, but many times through the years, when we would be given finishes and things, and I'd say, Nikolai, that's so stupid. What the hell are we going to do for? He said, because they pay us. That's why. And that's what we're supposed to do, what they pay us to do. I said, okay, you're right. I didn't think about it that way. So that's how he looked at it. Because I came to know him in '95, and that was still the tail end of that thing. And he hated it, because a lot of times when they would book him for independent shows, they wanted him. He's like, no, I'm not wearing that shit. He would tell him, I can't do it. Vince won't let me, which Vince didn't really care yet. In a couple of years, he would. I think it was after Droz got crippled that Vince said, no more talent, works independent shows. And Droz didn't get hurt on an independent show, but it was, it was like, still, we don't want that to happen, because if it happened to us, it could happen down there where there's less experience. So, but yeah, Nikolai did not like that, but he did it as a pro too, and he would come out, and I saw some of it, Well, then when they did the Shotgun Saturday Night, remember when they were doing that at different bars when Vince was losing the WCW, and they said Nikolai was living in a cardboard box in Times Square. And Todd Pettengill, he's walking over there. Yeah, here we are in Times Square. Like, oh, look, there's Nikolai Volkov, right? He's like, but he got him back, because he said, what you expect? I worked for WWE all these years. I have to live in a cardboard box. So that was good.
Well, that's great. So we're wrapping up here. Just wanted to, first of all, it's been great to have you back on the show, Nikita. It's always great to. And I did want to find out, did you ever wish the WWE had picked you up as a manager? Would you have ever wanted to do the...
Sure, absolutely. Because people always say, well, you live in your dream. I said, I had no dream to do this. You're crazy. I never believed it could happen. I'm luckiest son of a bitch on the face of the earth. I'm going to steal Lou Gehrig's line and add a little bit to it. But yeah, so I would go tomorrow even. I don't care. But
why do you think it never actually came your way to do the WWE?
They just dropped the managing thing. It's weird. I don't know what it was about that. I think Jim Cornette's talked about that a few times, and other people. It's like, I don't know. He just got a bug in his ass. Vince didn't want managers anymore. And that was it.
Well, maybe with if they allow gambling, maybe they can bring managers back.
Oh, believe me, when they change the title, the ownership, it'll be a different ball game. You can bet on that.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, especially who they then put in charge once Vince is there. So
whoever it's going to be, it will be a different ball game.
So, and Jonathan, do you want to promote your next article? I just saw it come out. The Jonathan, the Zane, the.
Yep. So my most recent one actually just came out today. It's Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz on SlamWrestling.net. Just came out today. I've got another one coming up 2 weeks that I still have to write, but I think I'm going to look at the Hall of Fame as well.
Oh, that's great.
As we come up on WrestleMania, Rey Mysterio was just announced for the WWE Hall of Fame, but not to get lost in that, there's a whole bunch of other Hall of Fames out there.
Right.
And I think it's a question with any of them who gets in and who stays out. I mean,
I read an article.
Pete Rose is in the WWE Hall of Fame to bring things full circle.
Yeah, that's true. I actually heard Hulk Hogan promote. He wants the Rougeaus to be part of the WWE Hall of Fame. What's your thought of that? Since you're a Canadian, yeah, what are your thoughts of the Rougeaus making the WWE Hall of Fame?
Well, I think Jacques certainly should be there. He had multiple runs with the Quebecers and as the Mountie and just as Jacques himself. I think if there's an argument that the Harts are in and the Von Erichs are in, that from a family, and the Funks as well, I think the Rougeaus going back generations are easily as important to Quebec wrestling as those families are to Calgary or Texas. I'm good with that. For that matter, I think Rick Martel should be in. And it's always struck me as an omission that he's not there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's a lot of guys.
To make room for Beth Phoenix.
You know what? I'm not going to say about Beth Phoenix. She had a solid career.
Or the Bella twins.
I'll tell you that if we want to go there, there's two additions to the Hall of Fame that I suppose I can understand. But to me, the biggest stretches, even beyond the Bella twins, who, whether they were great in ring or not, they did win championships and they did have a lot of influence in the mainstream media with the Dancing with the Stars thing, for example. And they did carry a reality show that my wife watches, and that brought her into wrestling. So I'm not going to trash that either. I mean, anything that brings people into the arenas, into the product, I think is a good thing. The two that I never fully got, and maybe you guys have a better sense than I do, are the Bushwhackers for being brought in as the Bushwhackers, leaving aside their accomplishments as the Sheepherders. I mean, they were a second-rate comedy act in WWE, even if they were popular with kids. And Coco Beware, who
no titles
again, you know, if you look at his body of work outside of WWE, it's a completely different story. But they brought him in as the Birdman.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you know, if you're looking for somebody that you sold trucker caps and T-shirts and stuffed parrots, then I guess you can make a case for either of them. But to me, those instances just kind of, you know, I think Halls of Fame are weird to begin with. I mean, you could look at the Baseball Hall of Fame. Gil Hodges was excluded for the longest time. They actually changed the nominating process so that eventually he did get in. But you know, he never got in when he was initially eligible, although his stats would have said otherwise.
Yeah, San Franciscans are quite upset about Barry Bonds, obviously, as you know.
Well, the PED thing's a different thing, and I've got a stupid hot take on that. I think let them all in. You still have to hit the damn ball.
I'm for letting them all in, but I would create. You see, what I would do is on the way to the bathroom at the Hall of Fame, I would have the Hall of Shame. And I would tell like the truth about like Shoeless Joe Jackson, Pete Rose, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens. You know, as you get to the urinals, and that's where you'd have their plaques. So they'd be in the Hall of Fame, but you know they'd have to take their punishment for having sold the game short. So
if they could make stuff around the urinals work, there wouldn't be a controversy.
Yeah.
Now, when you mentioned Rick Martel, he and Tony Gurria would be a good addition together.
I agree.
Yeah, no, they're
both deserving.
Stunning omissions there, but that's for another show at another time. We're out of time today. Nikita, you want to let people know, first of all, about anything you're promoting and also about how they can get a hold of you through social media?
Facebook on social media, my book, When It Was Real, through crowbarpress.com. And the Kindle version is on Amazon, When It Was Real. And it talks about the Worldwide Wrestling Federation in the 70s.
Great. Jonathan, tell everyone about your article, how they can find it, and how they can get a hold of you through social media.
So slamwrestling.net, Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz comes out every 2 weeks. Like I said, my latest just came out today, and I'm looking forward to writing the next one. And I'm available on by email if you'd like to send hate mail, since I'm sure that people do hate me, at wrestlers.
They don't. They, especially because they've got me to target. So no, you're not part of any. We've never gotten a single thumbs down for any of your appearances. So,
but have there been any thumbs up? That's the real question.
Well, yes, from me mostly. So
there you go.
Yeah, I help give myself my own promotion in that sense. But anyway, guys, it is great to have you on the show again. You're always welcome as guest host. Somewhere down the line, I've got to do a 3-year anniversary show for we've been on almost 3 years. So that all started when the lockdown happened. So it should be happening, a couple months or so. Anyway, it's great to have you. We'll have you on again. And be well in this time of crazy weather and so forth. Hopefully everybody is safe and gets a good result. We just had everything move an hour forward to spring here. I don't know,
Same here.
Okay, you guys have daylight savings too. So still wondering what we're saving it all for. I'd like to make a withdrawal a few times, and have a couple days that are just full light the whole time, and we'll just say that's daylight savings move forward. I withdraw from the bank or whatever like that, or the interest that we get on a lifetime's worth of that stuff. Anyway, guys, great to see you all. Happy spring, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds
good. Good night,
Thanks
everybody.
for having me. Good night.
Dos Vidania.